Welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast, a podcast for creatives. I'm your host, Tammy Takeishi. Join me for compelling conversations with artists, actors, authors, musicians, and other creatives about the impact of the creative and fine arts in their lives and our ever-changing world. Thank you for listening. Hello, and welcome to Creative Piecemeal Podcast. Today, I am joined by John Yamrus. He is an author and a poet. Having published books since the 1970s, he has more than 3,000 published poems and 39 and counting books. His latest are The Street and People and Other Bad Ideas. And I'm really excited to have him on the show. He is a friend of a friend, and I've had a chance to read some of his poetry. 24 Poems is the name of that particular book, and I've really enjoyed that. So welcome to the show, John.
Well, thank you, and it's really nice being here and being introduced by you. I am always introduced, and it interests me. I'm always introduced as an author and a poet. As if there's kind of like two separate things. Being a poet would qualify me, I hope, as being an author. But I think when people say author, they mean someone who writes prose works. And I guess I am an author from that standpoint, too, because of my new memoir, that you mentioned, called The Street. So thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And what's interesting is, some people who've written books have never delved into poetry. So you're one of those people who's done obviously a lot of poems and then delved into prose in your memoir. But I would love to start at the very beginning without giving too much away. It's who or what inspired you to follow this career path?
Ooh. Well, it was a who and a what. The what, probably a who too, was girls. I often tell the story. When I started writing, it was all the jocks that were getting all the girls, and I was too small for the football team and too short for the basketball team. So my way to get attention was learning how to write. So that was the what that got me started, and the who was probably the early beats, people like Kerouac and Ginsberg. I really liked those kind of people when I was starting out. And you mentioned calling me an author and a poet, and I've often talked about how I kind of get the goosebumps when people the bad goosebumps when people describe me as a poet, because I feel the term being a little too limiting, because if I just felt I was a poet, a writer of poetry, then I couldn't branch out into other things. Like, over the course of my 39 books, I've written 2 really bad novels. I've written 3 books of memoirs, 3 very slim ones. I've even written a children's book. But if you called me just a poet, I would feel limited and kind of tied in to that bracket. So I'm just a writer. That's all I am.
I don't think you're just a writer. You're very talented. And like I said, I've delved into the 24 poems. I've not had a chance to read your other works yet, but I'm really excited about that. So, because for me personally, poetry is one of my favorite genres to read and study and just delve into.
That's neat. I'll get into this later. Let's move. Give me another question. This is fun.
What is something about you that most people familiar with your work would not know?
Would not know that I like laying in bed late at night under big fluffy covers and reading Marcel Proust. One thing that people do know is I read several books at one time. Since I was a kid, I've been in the habit of having books practically in every room in the house, and so that I don't have to go looking for things when I'm ready to read. And I'm always reading, like I said, 5 or 6 books at the same time. And right now, to give you a snapshot of where I stand right now, I'm in a classics kick of a bit. I'm reading Balzac's Lost Illusions, which is one of my favorites. I've read that. I'm now on my fourth time. I'm rereading War and Peace, which another one that I come back to time and again. I've read War and Peace. This is my 12th time, and I just love that book. And of course, I read Marcel Proust. I've been reading him. That's one book, 7 volumes actually, that I've been reading off and on semi constantly since I was a kid, and I'm 73 now. I'll finish the final page, the one that ends with the memorable word time, which kind of encapsulates the whole 7 volumes. I'll finish that. I'll put it away for a couple of months or even a year, and then I just get sucked back in. And it's such a conversational book. And I know people get bored by it, or they say they can't get into it, but it's kind of like Bob Dylan's music or really good jazz. Not everybody gets it, but when you get it really deep. And that's how I get Proust.
Hmm. I must admit I have not yet read Proust, but I mean, I can add it to my list. I do love classics.
Well, that's a classic, and one of the other things that I just started this morning for only the second time is Dickens, Nicholas Nickleby. I've got 7 of his books in the wonderful Nonesuch editions. These are replicas of the original leather-bound editions. Big, great, big, beautiful, beautiful books, and it's just so much fun to sit there and read a beautifully made book, which is why I'll never have a Kindle or read a book on a computer.
I do love the physical aspect of holding a book, the way that it feels to turn a page, the scent. I mean, just everything. I love it when books are like embossed so you can
Oh
touch the
yeah,
cover, you know?
yeah.
I would love to talk about your creative writing process. Are there any, obviously you've written for a very long stretch of time. What has changed from the beginning to where you are now? And what is one of your favorite parts about the creative process?
Well, interestingly, for the process, the actual nuts and bolts process, not much has changed. I've always had a very workmanlike approach to the writing. I always took it seriously. I never understood those people who say, "Well, I'm waiting to be inspired. I'm waiting for the right time. I'm just absorbing things." That doesn't feel right to me. A writer is a worker. It's a job just like any other thing, and I take this job very seriously. I come down here in my room here, my little office, which is really our basement, and I do my work every day, every single day. And if you look at it, people like Stephen King, he writes every day of the year except his birthday and Christmas Day. And you can judge by the results that it pays off. And I do the same with my poetry. I'm not inspired every day, but I work at it every day. And you find that, like being an athlete, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And the better you get at it, the more chance you have of actually being inspired.
That makes sense. And what is one of your favorite parts about it?
Being surprised. When I sit down to write something, and I've learned a long time ago to avoid this, but when I used to sit down to write something with a plan, with an outline, with A is going to take me to Z. When I sit down with that kind of plan, I end up writing crap. But when I sit down like good jazz and let the melody take me where it wants to, that's when I get surprised, and that's when I have fun, and that's when my enthusiasm, my creativity, if you want to call it that, can carry over to the reader. And that's another thing that I've learned over the years is getting the reader involved in the process. A major mistake that most, well, all aspiring writers and many real writers make is explaining too much. It almost doesn't give the reader the credit that they're due. Years ago, I think my big aha moment was I wrote a poem. It was only 17 words. I have it memorized now. It's only 17 words. And the poem went, write a poem about that, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed, smiling. And before that time, I would have continued to write and continued to describe what that was, what the room looked like. But right then, it was like the clouds parted, and I realized that, holy God, the reader can imagine so many more things of what that was and what that room looked like than I could ever imagine. And that was a very powerful moment for me. And that's when I really felt like I had become a writer.
That is always really great. You know, you have that spark of inspiration, everything just sort of goes right. And like you said,
Yeah.
leaving more up to the reader, their imagination, where they want to take it, because it personalizes it.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, writing is a very intimate thing. It's a lonely business. You do it by yourself for someone who appreciates it by themselves. But when you got those two people connected, that is a really intimate connection.
You had mentioned jazz and music. Is that another passion of yours? Do you play
Oh,
instruments?
my wife swears she's going to bury me with my collection of Miles Davis albums. Uh, yes, jazz is a big passion of mine. I was talking to Keith Brocker. He's a gentleman who's published, I think he's brought out five of my books, including my selected poems, the director's cut. But oh, music. Well, the inspiration and the music and the jazz, the freedom. Well, jazz goes back to the beats, and they hopped on how the freedom of jazz taught them to be free in their writing, and I jumped on that train too.
Do you listen to music when you write or no?
No, no, because I'm all in no matter what I'm doing. If I'm writing, I'm right there. If I'm listening to music, I'm right there. And the, the other day, old man that I am, I'll be 73 in a couple of days. I was playing some Miles Davis, and my hands, I was like Zorba the Greek in the TV room, and the dog's just sitting there looking at me like, you crazy old guy, what are you doing now? And I was just enjoying the music, which is what the musicians wanted of me.
Well, happy early birthday. Do you have any big plans?
No. To wake up, probably have a nice day with my wife. We'll be married 49 years uh
Oh,
come June. Yeah, so I'm one of the lucky ones.
that's so sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed that you obviously dedicated your writings to
Every one
her.
of my books have been dedicated to Kathy.
That's a good move. Good move.
It's a smart move, a
Yeah,
wise move.
get you some brownie points, right?
Oh, for sure. You know, and she keeps me grounded. She makes sure that after I get that box of books in the mail and or read a review, she makes sure I go out and clean up the dog poop in the yard. So she keeps me grounded.
Oh, that's lovely. What is a piece of writing advice that you ignore and one that you follow?
Piece of writing advice that I ignore. It might have been that outline type thing. Like I said, I like to be a creature of the moment. I like to let the words take me where they are. And the one that I follow is the same thing. You know, I let the words lead me. I'm not smart enough to come up with an idea for a good poem. I let the poems give me the ideas. I did a TV thing yesterday, and we were talking about my latest book called The Street. Actually, I've got two books out. They both came out in November. The book of poetry that you described called People and Other Bad Ideas, and the memoir called The Street. And The Street, for lack of a better name, was the street that I grew up on back in the late 1950s. I grew up in a northeast Pennsylvania in a coal mining community with a church and a bar on every corner. And we were less than wealthy, and pretty much everybody either worked in the mines or worked in businesses associated with the mines. And that's kind of where I picked up my work ethic that I've applied to my poetry, to my writing. The people I grew up with carried a lunch pail and went to work every day. And with my writing, I try to do the same. I try to give it that same respect.
Is there a specific takeaway that you would like people to glean from your works after you're gone?
Other than he was a guy who had fun, who noticed the little things. I never liked the idea of writing the big book, not big size, but big ideas, where the big poem. I write poems about the little moments, the little things that sometimes people ignore. Like, here's a poem from the book called People and Other Bad Ideas. And it reads, her mouth was a ruined white flower. She had to be 80 or more, but she stood there in the back of the room while I read my poems to a couple of dozen students who only looked tired and bored. I wasn't into it, and neither were they, and all I could see was this mop of stringy gray hair and a face that kept urging me on. In my poems, like this one, I try not to come to any kind of conclusion. I just take a snapshot and let the reader come to their conclusion. I said this many times before that I see poetry, writing, but especially poetry, the way I do it, as looking out the window of a train, speeding train, and you see all this stuff going past you, but all you can see from your vantage point is what you see in that little bit of window, but everything else is going on. The whole world is going on outside what you can see. And that's what I try to do, try to describe in my poems, is that little 18 inches square and let the reader fill in the blanks.
That's what I love about your writing and other poets similar is the beauty of every day, the beauty of simple moments, the beauty of sometimes just a touch or a look or the sunset or something. Well,
Yeah,
obviously lots of people have written about sunsets, but you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
Yeah. In college, I wrote a poem about the potential of a blank piece of paper.
Uh-huh.
One of my personal favorites.
Oh, I thought you were gonna read it to me.
Oh, I'd have to dig that out. Well, I'll have to read that off camera.
Okay.
Because
Or send it to
this
me
is
off.
about you.
Okay.
This is the John Yamrus show today.
How nice of you. Let me read something else. A lot of my poems were about looking back in time. When I was a kid, I had a tricycle. It was red. I could go pretty fast on it. We lived at the end of our block. I'd get on the bike and go as fast as I could down the street to the other corner. I wouldn't slow down, and every time I tried to turn the corner, I'd fall. I'd always tear my pants or scrape an arm or something, but I always got back on and rode like hell back to the house. I don't think I ever did make it around the corner. I didn't have to. Just getting there was enough. And again, just poems about stupid little moments that, and those are the things that always meant a lot to me. Looking in the mirror and trimming a hair off your nose. Those little moments are just cool as anything to me. I don't know
Yeah.
why, but they are.
Yeah. And I love that. And I love how you just infuse so much sentimentality in there as well. I mean, like I can picture not only when you read, but also when I was reading on my own. It's like a movie in my head for every poem that you have. And
Well, thank you. Thank you. They okay. Let me do another movie in your head.
okay,
You asked for it, so I'm
I
going to
did. I
punish.
did.
Okay. This is another one from that book called Selected Poems, the Director's Cut. You got to remind me about that title when we're done here. This poem goes like this. When I was a kid, I worked in a shoe factory. I was a healer, putting heels on women's shoes. I'd glue the heels to the soles and put them on a conveyor that took them to a trimmer who sanded off the excess. And if I didn't do it well enough or fast enough, he'd turn around and throw a shoe at me. Pretty soon it got to be a routine. I'd glue and duck and glue and duck, and I was quick and young, and he rarely ever hit me. Eventually the work ran out, and I moved on. I often wondered what drives a man to act like that. After all, I mean, we were piece workers. We got paid by the finished shoe, and it cost him money to throw at me. Anyway, that was a long, long time ago, and I'm sure he's dead now. Leo. His name was Leo. My poem. And we were talking about that book, Selected Poems, the Director's Cut. Heath Brocker, Concrete Mist Press. He wanted to do a big retro. This is 2022, I think it was. Yeah, 2022. He wanted to do a big retrospective of my, at that point, 51-year career as a writer of poetry. And he wanted to bring out a 550-page book of my poetry. That was the largest format his process would allow. And I told him it was nuts. I said, first off, nobody's going to want to read 550 pages of my stuff. And secondly, nobody's going to buy 550 pages of my stuff. So we fought about it for about 3 months. And finally, he cut the book back to 340 some pages. And he brought it out, and it went on to become the best-selling title he had published to that point. So he came back to me and he said, John, we really got to do this book right. We got to do it the way I intended. And I said, Heath, you're even crazier than I thought you were, because we already sold as many copies as you're going to sell, and you're going to lose even more money. We fought again, and he won. I told him, you're nuts, but if you want to do it, we'll do it. And we ended up bringing out a 486-page book of my poetry, which we then called, the second edition, called Selected Poems, the Director's Cut, like how they do with the movies.
Yeah, I love that.
And this 486-page book went on to briefly hit #1 on Amazon in poetry. And that just blew me away. We were both beyond happy, and that at least taught me to never trust my instincts.
Or perhaps have a little more faith in your talent.
Okay. Okay, I'll never trust my instincts, and I'll try to have a little more faith. Thank you.
But yeah, it's definitely hard as a person in the creative field to be like, are people gonna want to buy my books or read my, or listen to my albums or whatnot? Like there's always a little bit, for many people, a little bit of imposter syndrome, or even just that feeling of vulnerability, because you love your work, but you never know what other people will think.
Oh, absolutely. Imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. That TV show I was on yesterday, the other guest on the show was a magician. I thought, holy God. The only magic I got is in my poems, and they can't compare with pulling a rabbit out of a hat. So I was up against stiff competition, but that was fun. It's been a fun career for me, and now at this point in my career, I'm seeing finally some books coming out in translation and getting reprinted, and it's really, really, really gratifying. It's neat and cool.
Obviously, you can't imagine doing anything else for a career, but if you had to, go back in time, is there anything else you would have loved to explore?
Well, porn star is really out of the question. So as much as I would have liked to, I have no sense of rhythm, so I couldn't play in a jazz band. So I think I've been stuck doing what I do now forever.
So you found the right path then.
I think I did. I think I did. It doesn't pay a lot, but it's what I like, and at the end of the day, doing what you like and what makes you happy is really important.
Yes,
Even more so
definitely.
the older that I get.
In your career, are there any barriers that you feel comfortable talking about that you overcame?
I really can't think of any. There were lessons I've learned, and lessons that I learned early on. When I was just starting out, this is before you were born. This was during the Mimeo Revolution, when people like Bukowski and Lifshin and Jerry Laughlin were just cutting their teeth, and anybody who could afford a Mimeo duplicator, a spirit duplicator. If you maybe you don't remember, when we were kids, teachers would run off the tests on a spirit duplicator, and we'd get these things printed off, and they smell like alcohol. So we'd sit there at our desks and smell these tests all day. And but I had a spirit duplicator, and I published a little magazine called Canto, Canto, because that was heavy and tez per pound at the time. And a big contributor to the magazine was the poet and novelist Gerald Laughlin. Now, Laughlin at that point in time was already almost as big as Bukowski, which will give you an idea of how famous Laughlin was at the time. And even though I was publishing this little 300 copy magazine, this icon was sending me poems every month and long conversational typed letters in which he would offer me encouragement, ideas, tips. He would send people big names to me to contribute to my stupid little 300 copy magazine. And he taught me to be kind to people, to encourage other people, to bring people along, and to be honest with people also. I learned that people can, if you're trying to be kind, sometimes it backfires on you. Once, 20 years ago, I did the mistake. This lady sent me a bunch of her poems and asked my opinion of them. And I was kind, and I said, these are very good. I read them every night. Or I forget what I said, but I was quite nice to this lady, and the poems were really bad, but I was trying to encourage her. And she went out and self-published this thing, and she must have been wealthy because the book was advertised all over the place with my name printed on the back, with my words of encouragement on the back. And it really bit me in the ass. People came back and said, John, we bought this book, you were recommending it, and it's crap. So since then, I've been nothing but totally honest with people whenever I could. So that was a lesson that I learned.
If you've been feeling burned out, stressed, overwhelmed, or exhausted, the resources and courses at the Self Care Institute are here to support you. The Self Care Institute was founded by Dr. Ami Kunimura and provides support for individuals and organizations with burnout prevention, burnout recovery, and stress management. I've personally taken a few of these courses and found them to be super helpful, both professionally and personally. The care you give yourself matters just as much as the care you give to others. But if self-care is difficult for you, you're not alone. And the Self-Care Institute is here to support your well-being, resilience, and sense of fulfillment at work and at home. For more information, visit selfcareinstitute.com or go to the show notes and click on the link. I was wondering if there are any specific artists, authors, musicians who have been influential in your life and consequently with your work.
Oh, for sure. Always tell this that Miles Davis in particular, his music, because he taught me more than any writing class could have taught me. He taught me the value of silence in poetry. He taught me because, especially in his early days, his work was very economical. He made every single note count. And in poetry, that's very important. And so he taught me the importance of silence. And in literature and poetry, that translates to the white spaces on the page, the blanks between the words. And they have meaning too. And that was a big aha moment for me, learning about the meaning of nothing, if you will.
I feel that way about Mozart.
Really? Really? That's interesting. You talked about other people that influenced me. I was really influenced by the Marx Brothers. Their humor, their timing, their offbeat way of looking at the world, and I think that carries over into some of my poems as well. Most of my influences weren't necessarily writers, although I very much like Nelson Algren, Mickey Spillane. I like Mickey Spillane, those old hard-boiled mystery novels of his. Those were great, and coming up through the Pulp Fiction era, those guys learned how to make the words count and give them a punch. So I learned a lot from guys like that, Nelson Algren and Mickey Spillane. Raymond Chandler.
This is going to be a bit of a quirky question. If you could be any fictional character for a day, who would it be?
Boy, I'd have to think about that one because maybe Jack Kerouac's pick, Pictorial Review Jackson. It's a little known book of Kerouac's pick. It's a pretty lousy book, but the character itself is kind of cool. He's almost like a character straight out of Dickens, transposed through the whiny lens of Kerouac. But yeah, maybe Pictorial Review Jackson.
What advice do you have for people who want to pursue a path in the writing realm?
Take it seriously, do it every day, and don't give up. I always tell people that these obstacles are put in our path, put in our way to weed out the unwilling. Be willing. I've always felt myself to be willing. Writers give up too easy. You got to have a thick skin to be a writer or a musician, any kind of creative person.
I like that. Be willing. That definitely is good advice, and I like it when it's little bitty nuggets of advice like that.
Well, if you want nuggets, I got lots of them. Those little nuggets are like dog food. I got a whole bag full of them.
I was wondering, how has your life in the creative arts been different than you imagined?
I don't know if it has been different. I really don't know how to answer that because I always just looked at the work. I didn't picture a result, a long game. I was always looking at and concerned with the now, this moment. I wrote a poem when I was getting ready to turn 70. This is that poem. I was flicking through this book and I found this poem. It goes, approaching 70. At this point in the game, I guess I'm supposed to be writing things like Sands at 70. The end is near, an ode to my lost and misspent youth. But I get the feeling that I'm not done yet, not by a long shot. So go ahead, give me what you got. I'm tough. I can take it. Go ahead, I double dog dare you. And that, I was talking to my sister. It's my sister's birthday, and I congratulated her on being 77, and she was moaning about it. And I said, I'm really looking forward to being 80. She was kind of shocked by that. For me, it's kind of like that's the goal, not the thing of becoming 80, but that's like when everything's gonna open up to me. And I'm just having so much fun. I always wanted to be, one of those old guys who stand on the corner and wave at the traffic and talk at the guys digging the holes on the street. I always wanted to be one of those guys, and I think I'm approaching my coothood quite well. I'm enjoying myself.
That's wonderful. It's a good thing. It's good to just live in the moment and just be grateful for being alive and being able to experience life, whatever comes your way.
Well, Kathy and I are dog lovers, and pets teach you that. They ground you, they keep you humble, and they really do teach you to enjoy the moment. I wrote a book called Five Dogs about the five that Kathy and I have loved over the years. Yeah, they teach you how to live in the moment.
They do. They're good like that. They're good like that. Yeah. Cats teach you about taking over the world.
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
And climbing the curtains.
That's right. It's always good to climb the curtains on occasion.
I found that poem the way I was talking about looking in the mirror.
Mm-hmm.
Object lesson. When looking in the mirror, it's often best to overlook the beginnings of a sag under the chin and wrinkles under the eyes. It's often best to ignore the gray around the temples and the bloodshot eyes. No, what you really have to watch out for is that look of fear and resignation and even terror. It'll kill you every time.
That's a good one to tape to the mirror.
Especially when you're shaving.
I have absolutely enjoyed getting to know you so far. I'm going to ask you one more question, if that's all right.
Okay, and I will read one more short poem. So who wants to go first, you or me?
Should we rock, paper, scissors?
Okay.
Okay.
Ready?
Yeah.
All right. 1, 2,
2, 3.
3.
Oh, rock, beat, scissors.
Go ahead.
Okay. In your own words, what does living a creative life mean to you?
Waking up and enjoying my coffee and being able to pet my dog, look at my wife, and read a book. And here's my poem. He knew it as sure as he knew anything. No summer is endless.
Bravo,
Thank
sir.
Thank you.
Listeners, please check the show notes for where you can purchase his multitude of books. And again, thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the podcast. Like the show? Have a question? Stop by the Facebook and Instagram pages. Links are in the show notes, or search for Creative Piecemeal Podcast on social media and click follow for all the latest.